sometimes when you're young, you can really put in that energy and time where you're just failing constantly, but you love something so much, you keep doing it, and sooner or later, you get good. So, like, I was writing 3,000 words a day. I wrote four novels, dozens and dozens of short stories, and believe me, I submitted them everywhere. I was eager to be published. I got probably 1,000 rejections because, again, four novels submitted to, you know, 40 or 50 agencies, a dozen publishing companies, and then every short story I submitted to every literary magazine in the country. Everything got rejected, 100%. Never published anything. But I just refused to believe that I was a bad writer, even though I was a horrible writer. But after about 10 years of doing this, I suddenly was not bad. But yeah, maybe one of the last times we spoke, we had the great idea we were going to be a top 10 box office movie, and we released your documentary, Choose Yourself, uh, on a regular movie theater, and we were top 10 box office because nobody was going to movies during COVID. So I think we
Yeah.
grossed like $9,000 in sales for the weekend, and we were like sixth in the country.
Amazing. The box office is a wild thing to track. We were talking before we got on. I was involved peripherally in the deal making of Sound of Freedom when it was released by Angel Studios, and to watch the way that movie took off at the box office, and then also how the money flows in movies is wild because it makes sense, but people don't ever think about the fact that let's just say a movie does $100 million at the box office. 50 million of it instantly goes to the movie theaters. So as the producers, you're going to get 50. And if you spent any money on advertising over and above that, let's just say you spent, I think spending $10 million, let's just say, to make $100 million at the box office, that's a pretty good return. So let's just say you spent 100, movie theaters take half of it, 50's left. You take off the 10 you spent on advertising, you now got 40. And what was your budget to make it? So I love
Yeah.
that business, and I'm learning it. I'd never, as you know, I'd never really gotten into the scripted theatrical side before. And I'm now getting into it, and it's a lot of, it's really exciting, but I'm really trying to learn how that business works because it seems to me at this point in time, the best bet in the film world is spend as little as you can to make something great, and and try to make a big box office bang. Now, if you have a good, decent box office, there's all sorts of global rights and streaming rights and other things that can come off of it. But it's just a fascinating business.
Does that model, like, in the 90s, I feel like the 90s was this the 90s and the 70s were these golden eras of indie kind of box office stuff. Like,
Yep.
that's when you get the Robert Rodriguez's, the Richard Linklaters, um, uh, Hal Hartley. Like, see, some of these guys were my favorite directors at that time. They could do the low budget stuff and make money. It's the My Big Fat Greek Wedding type of thing.
Right. Yep.
But I don't feel like that happens anymore. Now it's all like these really bad Avengers movies.
It's really hard to find a new franchise. The cool thing about Sound of Freedom, although there's controversy surrounding it, we won't talk about all that because it's still up in the air. But that was a blockbuster. I mean, 150 million, I believe it was, on the global release on a approximately $15 million budget.
Wow.
So, now that you've found that, you can ride it again 4, 5, 6 more times. And, because it's just hard to find something that works. I mean, look, we've seen the 18th reboot of The Little Mermaid, and one now 2005 Dalmatians now, or whatever it is. So, when you find something that works, it's fascinating. I think there's a couple things. There's a sentiment that indie film is going to make a big bounce back now. I don't remember the reasons, but there's several people talking about like the conditions are right in the market, I guess. And then the other interesting thing is that I read an article yesterday that the golden age of documentaries is over. Like, with this age when, Netflix and, I mean, all the Disney Plus, Hulu Plus, Paramount, like all whatever the things are, they decided they were going to stop licensing. Disney decides they're going to stop licensing their content to Netflix and others. They're going to control it themselves in their own streaming solution service. So they spend a fortune making the best content they can, and acquiring the best content they can get in with this sort of pipe dream, if you will, of how many subscribers we can get, and sort of this fake math. I mean, it's real math, but it's just hopeful math. And then once they got to a certain level of subscribers, all of them, they're essentially running a business with a fixed income with attrition, right? Which we all know in subscriber businesses happens. And so now they're no longer spending aspirationally on massive stuff. They're now, it's run much more like private equity or a hedge fund or something. It's just they're trying to make incremental gains, not lose their customers. So and I think they do have some. I'm sure they have some portion of money that they apportion to um, spending money on content that will win awards, so that they can bring in more subscribers. But it's interesting, they're no longer making these massive buys on documentaries where they were in the past, and I think that's going to continue.
Well, I mean, a couple of things there. One is the Netflix model is, like you say, it's a subscriber model. It's not necessarily about ongoing entertainment. So even if a show was a great show and was on its like second season, they would just cancel it if they did the math and it wasn't bringing in subscribers. That's why
Right,
there's all these frustrated Netflix viewers who are like, I loved, I don't know, Travelers or whatever,
right.
and why would they cancel? It was a great show, got great reviews. But it wasn't House of Cards. The math was showing it wasn't bringing in subscribers. House of Cards, they probably spent about $1 billion on the 6 seasons of that show, but the math shows that they got more than $1 billion worth of subscribers from that. Whereas other shows, only one show out of 50 is gonna be like that. So they're gonna just cancel the other 49. Documentaries, I would argue, the real golden age of documentaries was, well. Let me back off and say, who do you think? What single person has won more Oscars than anybody else? And I'll skip to the answer. The answer is Sheila Nevins, a person no one's ever heard of, because she was head of documentaries at HBO, and she did an amazing job. I just loved all the documentaries at HBO, and she was. This was at a time when nobody else was paying for documentaries but HBO, like in the '90s and
Yep.
'00s, and really quality stuff. The best documentarians, at that time, and I just thought that was a real golden age for documentaries. Like there was like an art there, like kind of starting with the Hoop Dreams type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get in a minute to sort of your choose yourself philosophy and a bunch of other things. But before we get there, it's interesting. I bought a charity auction to meet with this producer, this woman who'd won a bunch of Emmys for really good quality documentaries, because I wanted to ask her some questions about the business of documentaries. I still felt like I didn't quite understand, and how to make. I've been able to make a lot of documentaries, thankfully, and won a bunch of awards, but I still, the economics are still just weird. I'm just still trying to figure it out as a creative and business guy. So I bought this charity auction. By the way, that's how I met Larry King too. I bought a charity auction. He ended up becoming my business partner. But it's it. So I had this meeting with her, and she's like, "Nick, whoa, before you go on any further, I got to just stop you, because I don't think I can help you." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, I basically just got paid to produce documentaries for years for PBS. And then a few years ago, I got a call from someone at HBO, and they said, Hey, would you come make documentaries for me?" And she's like, No, I work for PBS. And he's like, Well, what if we just gave you a blank check to do whatever you wanted for HBO? And she's like, Oh, I would do that. And the thing was, like, because I was trying to ask her, like, I basically point blank asked the question, if you had to make these documentaries, and name the network, HBO was funding them, and you had to go back and monetize those through either selling them to Netflix or doing pay-per-view, like,
You can't
on
do it.
iTunes or whatever, would it? She's like, the math wouldn't work. I'm like, okay.
The math
So
won't work because
yeah,
HBO again had a different agenda. They were going for subscribers also, like Netflix, and they were the first. For HBO is a different beast, and I'll tell you why. If you look at every other network in the world right now, some executives there, if not the CEO, at some point worked for HBO. So Showtime, Viacom, Universal, Stars, the people who came up with House of Cards at Netflix, the people who came up with the first great original series, I forgot what it was, at Amazon. All these people came from HBO, and it's every industry I feel has a company like that where it's like the godfather of that industry. I say all of this because I loved HBO so much that I worked at HBO. I back in 94. I had two job offers in my hand. A massive 80,000 a year to work at JP Morgan or 40,000 a year to work at HBO. And I took the HBO job because I knew that was the quality place to work. Even though, it was JP Morgan was double the money, it was on finance, so the future was infinite. I just wanted to work for a company like that where that produced such works of art. And it was a great experience. It was the last job I've had actually, and it was just a great experience.
It seems though, like most life cycles and under certain leadership, I think HBO is trying to get back to the skeleton of what it once was as well
Well,
as an innovator and
it's
everything
dead
else.
now. I mean, a telephone
Yeah.
company owns it, and all the management is left. There's no HBO is like changed the name to Max. Like it's just not. I don't even know if HBO still exists. Like, is it still on TV dials? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's a great question. Who knows? By the way, do you know the story of how Netflix, of how they chose to make House of Cards?
No.
So we have to verify this, but it's a great story, and I believe I looked it up in the past. But so look it up if you want to know for real. But this is what I heard, and it makes sense. So apparently there was a British series back in the
Oh
'60s or
yeah, I
'70s,
did
something
hear
like that,
this.
called
Yeah.
House of Cards, and then there was a bunch of Netflix was looking at the data, and a bunch of the people who were watching this old series happened to also be massive Kevin Spacey fans, and I forget. Do you remember who directed House of Cards?
Well, I don't know who was the first director, although Robin Wright directed most of the episodes. Believe it or not.
So wow, and so but there was something to do with basically they triangulated data, and they realized that if we just took Kevin Spacey and put him in this series these same fans like with the same director everybody likes, ta-da, and it apparently really worked. And so we're in a really interesting age of data and obviously AI and everything now too, that is pretty fascinating of what you can triangulate. Not everything works, but that it makes sense. So those of you who are interested, look up the House of Cards story with Netflix and verify it for yourself. But James, you started writing. Most people probably know you as a podcaster, blogger, writer. You started writing because of a girl. Tell us the story of what got you into writing.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably multiple girls there, but I remember there was this one. I was kind of in between college and graduate school, and there was this girl who I had a crush on, and she was always talking about different writers, and she was trying to be a writer. And this one friend of mine, my roommate at the time, actually, he was reading like Ulysses by James Joyce and Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, like all these pseudo intellectual books that were honestly, if you read those two books. Thomas Pynchon and James Joyce are great writers, but those two books are completely unreadable. I challenge anyone to tell me they've actually read those entire books. And anyway, he was always like quoting them, talking, and they started going out. He started going out with the girl I had a crush on, and I'm thinking, and he always was calling himself a writer. He had never written a single word, and I was like, damn, I'm gonna have to be a writer. And then I got obsessed. Like I basically I was going to graduate school in computer science, but I wasn't attending any of my classes. I was just literally sitting at home reading a book a day. Like I was just reading so much because that's how you start to get good. What did all the other good writers do? And and then I was writing every day. I was writing 3,000 words a day, and I really sometimes when you're young, you can really put in that energy and time where you're just failing constantly, but you love something so much, you keep doing it, and sooner or later, you get good. So, like, I was writing 3,000 words a day. I wrote four novels, dozens and dozens of short stories. And believe me, I submitted them everywhere. I was eager to be published. I got probably 1,000 rejections because again, four novels submitted to 40 or 50 agencies, dozen publishing companies, and then every short story I submitted to every literary magazine in the country. Everything got rejected 100%, never published anything. But I just refused to believe that I was a bad writer, even though I was a horrible writer. And but after about 10 years of doing this, I suddenly was not bad. And then I started getting published, and people started to be fans of my writing, and now I've written over 20 books. I've had some bestsellers. I mean, people write me. It's a very exciting thing, and you know this from creating the documentaries and so on. It's very refreshing when work you've done last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you still get letters saying, hey, this really inspired me. Here's why. Here's the story. I really wanted to reach out to you. And I've met so many good friends in my life, including you, Nick, because of my writing. So I'm really grateful for the effort and the failures that I've had in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. One of the things that I've found that we don't do enough, and we'll talk about this later too, but like as we get older and more comfortable, like we stop competing in a way, and we stop getting rejection because it's an uncomfortable skill.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's made me the most resilient ever is being in the music business, and because I mean, if I write 100 songs, I'm lucky if one of them gets cut. And so, like right now, you probably don't know this, James. I'm actually ranked in the top 10% of songwriters in the world right now,
Oh, wow.
and
I
it's
did not
like,
know that.
thank God I don't have to live on that because you couldn't. But that means there must be a lot of really, really terrible songwriters. But it's that thing of like you like doing it for yourself first, and then letting it go where it goes is like a really freeing thing. It's my friend Lisa Nichols says her grandma used to always tell her, what other people think of you is none of your business. And I try to translate that too to my songwriting and my documentary filmmaking and everything else. Like what other people think of it really is none of my business. Like I made it the best way and the way I wanted to make it. And it is refreshing to think that way. And then of course you do get positive feedback from people who are not paid to criticize. And a couple of my documentaries, I've literally met people who told me that they were going to commit suicide, and they saw this documentary and it led them to a solution. One of them was a veterans post-traumatic
Oh.
stress organization, some other things. Like, man, if that happened for one person, that whole thing was worth making, obviously. And so it's interesting putting your children out in the world as art.
Yeah, you're right, and it's important to remind yourself that all it takes is that one person to make it worth it. Because with you can argue social media is our new standard of metrics, where, oh my gosh, how many followers do I get, how many reviews, how many likes,
Right.
and that's not why I started writing. I'm sure it's not why you started doing documentaries. But there's always been metrics. Like money is an important metric, and people do want some level of, let's call it, fame, or at least notice for the work they do. So all of these things together. But you're right, when you're older, there's a lot of reasons why we don't have the same kind of energy and resilience against rejection. And it's important to still practice that, although it's harder as you get older.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny. The story, by the way, of why I started making documentaries, pretty funny story. I was coming back from my eighth or ninth Grammys, and I hadn't been nominated for anything, and I didn't see any nominations in my near future. And so I said, this sucks. I wonder if I could be better at something else. And so I was like, I wonder if I can make TV or films. And I literally Googled how to win an Emmy on the airplane, and I followed the instructions. And in the next 2 years, I got my first Emmy nominations. I won my
Wait, what
first
did you
Emmy.
do differently? How do you win an Emmy?
It's just, first of all, it's fascinating that they basically, the article said, hey, look, um it's not about how much equipment you have, because I mean, at the time I made my first probably 10 documentaries on DSLR cameras, and like still cameras that they started allowing video on them. And so everything got cheaper, right? I mean, non-linear editing. So no longer did it have to cost you, name the number, half a million, 5 million, $10 million to make something. Everyone had access to essentially the same level of equipment that was at least in the ballpark as what professionals had. And so it basically was like it all lives and dies on a great story and great execution. Like, and I was like, okay, I can understand that. And then now looking back over the years of honestly, James, so many things in my life have been a struggle, but documentary filmmaking has been the easiest thing I've ever done. And I think if I really look at it, it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, we've had many of the 10,000 hour discussion, and it can accumulate. Like, definitely some of the skills that I learned and some of the kicks in the face I had in those other businesses, I was clearly able to bring that knowledge with me into documentary filmmaking. But then at the end of the day, someone asked me the other day, what directing was, and I couldn't answer it. To a friend of mine, Remy Adelecki, who's a former Navy SEAL, now has directed a bunch of stuff. He's a Hollywood actor. And he and I were talking about it, and he said, Nick, I finally figured out how to explain directing to people. And I said, tell me, please. He said, it's just team building. I was like, it makes sense. So really, when I make films, I just stay in my lane. Like I have great conversations. I do what I do well, but like I don't shoot the cameras. I don't edit the stuff. I don't pick the music. I just stay in my lane and I find fascinating stories. And I think my success has been because I genuinely love people, not only my crew, but the people who I make films on and with. I gain an insight, and I think that that's why it connects with audience. Maybe I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean, as having been one of the subjects of one of your documentaries or docu series, I can say you you do this, but then this filters down to your team. You very much make the subject feel like they're wanted, they're important, they have something to say, and so that does inspire someone to say something. And I think you guys do a very good job. And I've known a lot of directors, you know, of course, it is selection bias. I only know the directors that are good enough to be directors of things,
Yeah.
and everybody's been very good. But I think that's a special skill you have, that you make everyone feel wanted,
Well, thank you, and everyone should check out "Choose Yourself," the docu series on Amazon. It was lots of fun to make. So,
which we
hey,
self-published on Amazon, basically. And if you
yep,
search for it, it looks like any other Amazon Prime series. Nobody
yep,
would know that we just uploaded it.
it's part of the game. That's how the game works.
That's part
All
of
right,
the choose yourself kind of philosophy. Like, we'll, if no one's gonna get us to do it, we'll just do it.
let's do it ourselves. Absolutely. You took a job at HBO. You started having some ideas, which you do. That's sort of a James thing to do. And then you had some ideas you wanted to do, and you sort of presented them to your boss. Your boss said, you can't do that, essentially. And you went around him directly to the CEO, which
Yeah.
is sort of a risky move. But tell us about that meeting with the CEO and what happened.
Yeah, so this brand new thing called the web was happening, and the World Wide Web, WWW, and everybody, particularly in the cable business, everyone was like, "That's just for academics. We're in the cable business. It's all about cable. It's not this internet thing." But they were wrong, of course, and so HBO finally. First off, they didn't own HBO.com. They finally bought HBO.com for $250,000 in, maybe it was 1995, and then they asked me to build their website, and I had this idea which everybody thought was ridiculous and no one would let me do. So I literally just walked to the CEO's office, which was not easy because it's amazing how many people will try to stop you along
Yeah.
the way. I mean, my title was junior programmer analyst in the IT department, which was so obscure. It was even in a different building than the HBO building. So I had to go over. So I go over to the HBO building, go to the Jeff Bewkes's office, who was a great CEO, by the way, and then he became CEO of Time Warner and recently retired. And and he's like, I walk into his office and he immediately said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on the website for HBO. I'm making the website for HBO." And he's like, "Okay." And I said, "Listen, HBO has the best original programming on TV. Why don't we do something new? Let's make not just a marketing website, but let's make original web shows for HBO on the website. No one's doing this." And he's like, "Okay, just do it. You do whatever you want." And so I went back to my boss, who was a little upset, but finally I said, "Look, Jeff Bewkes told me I had to do this." And so he was like, "Okay, I guess we have to do it." And so I started this very HBO like, there was a sort of HBO feeling of what a TV show was. So I started this very HBO like show called 3 a.m., which was me going out at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday night, not a Saturday night when everyone's out anyway, but a Wednesday night, which is sort of an obscure night. And I would ask people at 3 in the morning, "Why are you out at 3 in the morning? Like, don't you have to work the next day or go to school or what's going on?" And I would interview, or I would have 4 good interviews a week. I did this for about 3 years, and I would design around the interviews, and it was rare, but occasionally there'd be a little video, and it was the most popular part of the HBO website for 3 years. This web show, 3 a.m., which I also shot as a documentary for HBO. They never aired it, but they gave me the budget, and we shot 60 minutes, and it was such a great experience. I interviewed probably 10,000 people at 3 in the morning in New York City at this time, and it was really a life changing experience for me to create art like that. It was beautiful.
What do you think you learned the most from that experience from the 3 a.m. interviews?
To really never judge people. Like at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday night, it's the opposite. It really is. There's a whole culture at that time of people who are up at that hour doing things. And the things they're doing are not, they're not the sort of things you would do at 3 in the afternoon. They're usually illegal or illicit or questionable activities. And but all of these people were having, they had their troubles and their highs and their lows, and they were very different. Some of them you felt really sorry for, and they were in
Yeah,
situations that were, very bad for them. And and I mean, I really turned over every rock in New York City, which was still transforming itself in the '90s. It wasn't the
yeah,
Disneyland city it is now,
yeah.
and so you met a lot of people in a lot of difficult situations, and they were good people, but you learned, again after 10,000 interviews, there's no judging, that we're all in this together.
Sounds like the earlier version of that show, that YouTube show, Soft White Underbelly. Have you seen that?
No,
It's this guy who goes to Skid Row and interviews these people. Like, it brings them into the studio, he photographs them, and he interviews them in black and white, and it's fascinating the things they talk about. I mean, he's got anything, everything under the sun you could believe, even stuff you can't believe. You should check it out. But it's sort of that sort of vibe, just non-judgmental questioning of people who are in really different circumstances. I'm working on one documentary and probably about to start on a second one, that both revolve around homelessness right now. And I got to say, like, homelessness is nothing I ever looked into. Quite frankly, I always pretty intentionally looked away from it, right? Because
yeah,
I don't know what to do with it. But I actually was working with an organization in Dallas the other day, and it's a Christian organization, and they invited me in to just sort of learn about it for the day. And then because it's a Christian organization, they held like a Christmas worship service for, for the homeless. And I went and I sat down next to this guy and had an amazing conversation with this guy who's homeless, and he's from Nigeria. He was an attorney. He then came to the States, and he got his master's at Penn State, and he became a corrections officer. I don't know exactly why. And I think he just got tired of it and quit, whatever. But like, you got a guy he hasn't passed the bar exam yet, but he's trying to take the bar exam again, because he was an attorney in Nigeria. My understanding was because it was some sort of Commonwealth nation, he doesn't have to go to law school here in certain states, or maybe all the states. He can just take the bar exam and become a practicing attorney. But it's like, I would never expect, if I walked into a homeless encampment, that I'd meet a guy like this. I would just expect total mental illness. And while all those things exist, I just have so many questions of that I now need to know the answers to, that I'm fascinated to go do these documentaries, because so many of these people are just like me and you. They've just had sort of a string of bad events. I mean, look, they say most people, I don't remember the statistics. I guess we can just make them up, but most people in America are what, like 1 to 2 paychecks away from being homeless or whatever.
yeah,
And so these are the people who miss 2 paychecks. And think about that, like how easy it would have been in either of our lives, still in our lives, quite frankly,
yeah,
to, if, to have a couple of bad things happen in a row, and all of a sudden you find yourself on the end of nowhere to live, nowhere to go.
yeah. And it's not even like the two missing paychecks. Also, there's a certain skill required to live a quote unquote normal life. Like renting an apartment, you have to fill out all this paperwork and background checks and this and that. It's not so easy to stay above the line. And it's easy to imagine that at any time you could have fallen below that line, where, the line of whatever you call it, normal society, or where you're not in that category of like, oh, I have to avoid this. So,
Right. And,
it's
and think about not having a safety net either. Like I have family that lives nearby, and I live in the Orlando area. I've been here all my life, other than when we immigrated from Barbados. Like, I've been here my whole life. So like, I have such a security net, that, like, you think about coming to another country and not having that. Like, where do you go? What do you do? I mean, it's pretty obvious how it could happen now that I start thinking about it, but I just never really paid attention.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, it's easy to say there, but for the grace of God go I. Like these
Yeah,
these people are our people.
I totally agree. So I'll keep you posted. I'm learning some cool things. I bet you there'd be some fascinating interviews for both me and you to have with some
Yeah.
of these people because they're just it'd be in your vein of the 3 a.m. stuff. What look, so you built that website and then you started building other websites. Tell us about some of the other websites you built. You ended up selling that company and then you lost it all. Give us a bit of that journey.
Yeah, so because of the 3 a.m. website and a few other things I was doing, I was building HBO.com, and nobody knew. Maybe like five people in New York City at that time knew how to build a website. Like it was not easy like it is now to build a website. You had to really build. You had to program. You had to design. You had to. There were no tools available. Like you had to
Yeah, it
go
wasn't
to the
drag and
core.
drop like it is now, right?
Right, like WordPress, I could set up a website in 5 minutes. So, but then it would take a long time and a lot of work. And so I did American Express. So people would reach out to me like who needed help building a website. I did AmericanExpress.com. I did uh, TimeWarner.com. I did websites for almost every record label, every movie studio because I sort of specialized in the entertainment industry. But I would do the AmericanExpress.com as well because they paid very well. And I built a pretty big company doing web design. But I saw that, okay, this is a skill that's going to go away. Like my little sister was learning how to build websites in junior high school class.
Yeah.
So uh, I sold that company, made a lot of money at first. Uh, uh, I remember at one point I thought basically I was done with everything in terms of like every goal in life. Like I looked at my bank account, I had $15 million cash in it. It wasn't just like stock; it was cash. And then, and then I don't know. I had this weird feeling, and you could be, I could go to a million therapists, and I still don't know why I had this feeling, but I felt like I legitimately thought I was poor, and I thought I wouldn't really be rich unless I had 100 million, and so I started taking big risks. Now I knew how to make websites and charge for them, and then I was lucky there was a boom, and I sold this company. But I started thinking I was great at everything because I was great at this one thing, and I started investing, and I didn't know anything about investing at the time. And I remember at one point I lost about, and again, this was not. I didn't start off with stock. I started off with cash. There was one point I was losing about $1 million a week for an
Oof.
entire summer, and I basically lost everything. I went at the low. I remember looking at my bank account, the same account that had once had over 15 million in it, and there was $143 cash in it, and
Jeez.
I was so scared and so depressed all the time, and I was losing my home, and I would have been. I even in that situation, I would have been homeless if I lived 2 or 3 blocks from 9/11, which all by itself it was horrible for so many families. For me, all what it meant was that I couldn't sell my place because it was a crime zone, and and here I was, I couldn't afford it, so I was losing that, and uh, and I just was so depressed. I couldn't get up out of bed in the morning. I could. People would tell me, "Oh, spend time with your babies." I had two little kids. Spend time with your babies. That'll cheer you up. No, it did not cheer me up. It's hard work spending time with babies, and also I kept thinking I just ruined their lives by losing all this money. So I had this I had bought an expensive life insurance policy when I had the money, and I thought, look, they're never going to remember me, and this might be an opportunity for them to have money. But I couldn't figure out. I would Alta Vista. How could I kill myself without hurting myself? And there's real just to end that story. There's no way to do that without hurting yourself. So don't do it. But Alta Vista was a search engine pre Google,
Yeah.
and but one day I I just decided I needed to. I would take these long walks because I had nothing to do, and I wandered into this restaurant supply store, and I saw these waiters pads for sale, and I always loved the look and design of waiters pads, so I bought all these waiters pads, and then every day I would like take them to a cafe on my early morning walk, and I just started writing down like 10 ideas, like, oh, here's 10 books I could write, here's 10 businesses I could start, here's 10 ideas for so and so, and I would send them the ideas, and they were almost all bad ideas. But after a few weeks, even I suddenly realized oh, what's this feeling I have? Like I haven't had this feeling in years. I was excited about something. Like maybe I would write that book, or maybe I would start that business. And I wouldn't, but you know, and then I really was like actively sending emails to people and saying, here's 10 ideas for your business. No need to respond. I'm just happy doing this. And suddenly that excitement turned into real opportunities. Like people would write me back and say, hey, these are great ideas for articles that you suggested that I write. How about you write them and we'll pay you? And then another guy was like, oh, these are great 10 great investment strategies. Because at this point, I was obsessed with learning how to invest better after losing all this money. And I used my software abilities to program up a bunch of investing systems. And people started sending me money to invest for them. So I started a hedge fund. And like out of these 10 ideas a day, I was no longer depressed, even though I was in worse shape every day than the day before because I was spending money and not making it. And B, created two different careers for me, one in writing and one in investing.
Yeah, it seems it's funny when I every time I speak with you about your love of waiter pads, it feels to me like it's like that's like one of the perfect pieces of art to you, isn't it? It's like just the right size, just the
Yeah,
right number of spaces and lines.
yeah, it can fit into your pocket. It's not white like every other writing instrument is. It's like this light blue, and it's the lines are very clearly delineated. So you every line is a new idea. And so it kept my ideas very crisp because every line is a new idea, and uh, and there's just kind of like this retro thing about waiters pads, the numbers at the top, like what ticket this is, and I just loved it. And every day I would force myself to do not 6 ideas, not 7 ideas, but 10 ideas. And that's why most of the ideas are bad. You can't write 3,650 good ideas a year. Like you're only going to have one good idea, but you have to. I realized it's a muscle. People say ideas are a dime a dozen, execution is everything. That's the worst saying on the planet because execution ideas are a subset of ideas. You have to be good at generating ideas to be good at executing. Like if you're executing, if you're making a documentary, for instance, and there's something difficult, oh, you can't shoot in the inside of the White House, you have to be creative about how you shoot things,
Yep.
and you have to have lots of ideas. And this goes for entrepreneurs. Like I had a friend who was raising $2 million for a software project, and she said, oh, she needed to make the software to then see if it works. And I'm like, this idea that you have, why don't you just do it manually for some of your friends and see if they'd be willing to pay for it? And then if you have a business. You don't have to raise $2 million first. So again, that's an example of two different types of execution ideas. One might be better than the other. And so you need to sharpen up your idea muscle. Most people let it atrophy. Muscles atrophy in just a few weeks. So it's very good. It's been very helpful for me having these 10 ideas a day, and I still do it.
Yeah, it's part of your daily practice, which we'll talk about in a minute. But so you you use so how did you ultimately get out of that funk and start making money again? Was it investing? What was it that got you there?
Yeah, well, first off, yeah, you mentioned this concept of a daily practice, and I realized that on the best days and all the times in my life when I was doing well, compared with all the times when I was going broke, and this happened to me more than once. I started another business, eventually several years later, sold it for millions, went broke again, and this has happened to me at least 3 times. And I started to think, what's the common factors when I'm on the way up as opposed to when I'm on the way down? And this is sort of a fill in the blanks thing here for people, but so because it almost sounds too easy, but every day I would ask myself at the end of the day, have I improved myself physically 1%? So diet, sleep, exercise, whatever. So that's one, is physical. Number two, emotional. Have I worked on my relationships today? Friendships, family, whatever. Number three, have I written my 10 ideas a day, which is have I worked on my creative health? And number four, spiritual, which fill in the blank for yourself. But for me, it was simply, have I reduced the amount of time I spend with regret and the time I spend, with fear of the future? So regret about the past or fear of the future. In other words, do I surrender to the things I can't control? And that surrendering is very important because it allows you to clear your mental real estate So if some of these ideas are good, you can work on them, and you have the physical health. You can't start a business if you're sick in bed. So you have the physical health to work on them, and you can't start a business if you're arguing with your spouse. So your relationships are good. So now you can move forward. And that's really the only way I've ever been able to move forward in life, is checking the box on those four things: physical, emotional, creative, spiritual.
Love it. We'll get meta here for a second, because the whole purpose of this podcast called Questionable, it's all about the fact that if you want better or more or success in any category of life, business, relationships, whatever, if you really distill it down, my belief, and until someone proves me wrong, I think it's pretty good uh, thesis, that the way to get better any of these things is to ask better questions of yourself. And I love the fact that what you really started doing when you were down at your lowest point, and you basically asked yourself a couple questions, like what's different now than when I felt really good, and you were able to distill it down into these four categories. And basically at the end of every day, you check in by asking these four questions, and that's what helped you to gain momentum again, because momentum is a really hard thing to build. It's like one of the things I think about, like, if when you get out of prison, let's say, it never happened to me, although I did just go to jail with Jelly Roll last week. It was pretty awesome. He gave a commencement speech in jail to 200 inmates, and it was amazing.
Was that the first
And
time
then
you've
he
been in a
performed.
prison?
What's that?
Yeah, was that the first time you've been in a prison?
No, I've never been in a prison. I've only been to jails. I've been to Haitian jail once. I've been to jail in
Oh.
Michigan now 3 times, all as a visitor, and all of them, and for doing projects. But it's pretty wild, man. Have you been to jail before?
I haven't. Yeah. Oh, I've been to a prison, one time visiting friends, an inmate who was a friend of mine. He was a like an activist, and he had gone to jail.
Hmm.
And another time as part of this 3 a.m. project. What was Rikers Island like at 3 in the morning?
Oh,
So
wow. That's cool. So, but I imagine when you get out of jail, um, you basically, it's funny. Even the sheriff says, these people have all done things that you've done. They just got caught. And I'm like, that's probably true. And
yeah,
so, like, when you get out of jail, you now have a record. You've been in jail. You, like, starting over has got to be really hard. Like, building momentum, that most of us build pretty good momentum, through our 20s, from just going to school and getting a degree or whatever it is. Like, you have things going for you. I just imagine starting from scratch again must be really hard. But that's in a way what you did with your own health too. But I
yeah.
just love the fact that it was done by asking questions.
I mean, I remember one time I was just so sick of like, is this really happening to me again? Like that I have to start over from scratch. But the nice thing is, and there's people always say, and I will say, you only really learn about meaning in life having gone through suffering, but suffering is no good. Like failing is not fun. It's not like, oh, this is great that I'm going through failure because it means success is around the corner. No, failure is like it feels like the end of the world,
Right.
and and it's just not pleasant. But what is pleasant is when things start to click together again, and you see, oh, it's happening again, like it's working, that I'm coming back. That's a very exciting feeling, and you forget that feeling often when you get older, and whatever routine you're in, whether it's a routine of success or a routine of satisfaction, whatever, uh, you know, you miss a little bit that spark, that new intensity, which is something I've always tried to recreate no matter how old I get.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You talked about surrender earlier. Like, that's one of the, like, as part of my faith, I think that's an important practice. But I think just in general for people, you mentioned already too. Like, there are so many things in life that we just cannot control. I mean, if you just really stop and think about, like, I can't really control if the person on the other side of the yellow lines crosses them and hits me head on and either paralyzes me or puts me in a coma or kills me. I can't control if the roof here caves in on me. Like, if you just surrender to, like, I'm just going to do the best I can with what I've been given today. I'm going to treat the people in front of me the best I can today. I'm going to do, like, there's really so few things you can control, that I think the only way that I have found to get through some of those times, and I honestly, I'm a very upbeat person, as you know. I'm probably on the happiness scale. I'm probably an 8 or a 9 daily. Haven't dealt with a lot. I've dealt with sadness and loss, but, like, not a lot of depression, which I'm starting to understand more, I think, but you don't really understand unless you have it. But I think the only ways I've been able to get through the things that were really hard for me, whether it was, massive debt or failure or almost going to bankruptcy, or, dealing with, business and employees and losing lots of money during COVID every week, was really just surrendering to the fact that, like, let me let the best I can. And again, I always love saying these things because I'm really talking to myself, everybody. Hopefully it helps you too. But like, I'm reminding myself, like, you got to get rid of the ego, you got to get rid of all the things and stop worrying about everything else, and just saying, what can I do right now? What can I do that's going to be helpful? It's funny. A friend of mine, Dr. Nito Cobain, an amazing guy. I call it his rule of thirds. He said to me one time, he said, Nick, a life well lived is a life lived in thirds: 1/3 earning, 1/3 learning, and 1/3 serving. And I think that's a really good formula. And so for me, what I've found, when I get in a space where I don't even know what to do next, if I just stop and remember that and go, okay, what could I do today to, like, brainstorm what earning might look like in the future? What could I do to think about how I might serve somebody in front of me right now today? Because once you start serving other people, I have found that you get out of your own headspace because you're actually doing something for someone else, and your problems seem to solve themselves in a lot of ways when you start serving.
I
And
think
then,
that's
like,
true.
every day, if I'm learning, like, that gives me that spark. If I'm learning, I start to get excited about things, so I'm learning things I didn't know. So that's sort of how I've dealt with that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that's kind of how the brain works too through your life. Where you have more ability to do serving later and learning earlier, and and you mentioned faith. One thing that runs through every faith really is to kind of do this surrender and and not question always. Like in the so what is your faith? You're a Christian.
Christian, yep, yep.
So in the book of Job, there's chapter 39. Job is like, this does not make any sense what has happened to me. I'm a good guy. I was rich. I had a great family. God, this does not make sense. This is wrong. And God said to him, hey, did you make the universe? And Job's like, no. And can you tell me how I made the oceans and the sky and the land and the sea? And Job's like, no. And like, God, you can't even tell me how I did those basic things. That was like the first things I did. And now you're gonna question your little insignificant life, like what I'm doing about I made the oceans, and you're telling me about how to just deal with. You're like an insect to me. And Job got the idea that he can't. He's got to leave it up to God.
Yep. What's for you will come. I totally, I love it. Look, one of the things that you got known for was Bitcoin. And at first started out, you just were trashing Bitcoin. And then I guess a friend came to you and started explaining sort of the Bitcoin economy a bit to you. Tell us a bit about what happened during that time period. And I'd love to hear where you're at with Bitcoin today. As we're talking here
Sure.
in December of 2023, Bitcoin's actually on the rise again, which is interesting. But tell me about your Bitcoin journey.
Yeah. So in 2013, so a lot of people were talking about Bitcoin already, and I used to do these Q&A sessions on Twitter every Thursday. I did this for about 6 or 7 years, and somebody asked me, "What do you think of Bitcoin?" And I said, "You know what? This is March 2013. I said Bitcoin's probably a scam. I would stay away from it." And so Naval Ravikant, who's an entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur and investor, and really into Bitcoin, he calls me and says, "Listen, I'm going to be in New York in a week. Let's sit down and I'll teach you about Bitcoin." And I said, I was skeptical, but I said, sure. And so we spent a day or two just going over all this stuff about Bitcoin. And he convinced me that this was the future. And so I had my all-time best-selling book, Choose Yourself, was coming out in June. And I made 30 days before it was to be released on Amazon, I made a Bitcoin only store where I there was only one product for sale in the store, which was my book. And I said, you could buy my book for 1/10 of a Bitcoin, a PDF of my book for 1/10 of a Bitcoin 1 month before its official release. And about, I think it was, I sold about 61 or 62 of PDFs of my book, Choose Yourself, for 1/10 of a Bitcoin then, which was about $6. Bitcoin was about, I think, $61 or $100, something like that. And I went on CNBC to talk about Bitcoin. Everyone always brings up the one tweet where I trash Bitcoin, but I didn't know anything. And then I learned about it. And then in 2018, 5 years later, or 2017, 4 years later, I started selling courses on so people could understand what Bitcoin is and how to buy a Bitcoin, how to invest in a Bitcoin, how to trade Bitcoin. I've been an investor for a professional investor for 20 years. So Bitcoin was a new asset class, and uh, I got a lot of backlash, like, who is this guy? Blah, blah, blah. Here's this one tweet he made in early 2013, forgetting completely that I was on CNBC just 3 months later, extolling the benefits of Bitcoin. But since then, I mean, I've spoken all around the world about crypto and cryptocurrencies. And I do have it's not my, it's, it's an area I stay actively invested in and always keeping on the frontier of. I have a newsletter that people subscribe to where I give my latest, crypto ideas and thoughts and analysis. And, you know, Bitcoin's interesting because I don't think Bitcoin is the most valuable in terms of the value it provides in the crypto ecosystem, but it's a good thing to keep track of to see how the whole industry is doing. And obviously, with the rise of Bitcoin and crypto as a legitimate asset class, now they're discussing having a Bitcoin ETF. That's driving the price. But what's really driving the price of a lot of these things is, again, I've spoken all over the world. A few months ago, I was in Norway speaking to the central bankers there, and they were asking me, like, well, okay, so what do you think of crypto as a payment system for the world, for the nation and the world? And basically every country is asking this question now, like, crypto technology is better payment system, worldwide payment system, than the older technology, which is wiring money around, and money disappears for a while
Right.
in some fog of, you know whatever, central banks, local central banks, the Swift wiring system. I mean, I was in Amsterdam a few months ago, and I accidentally ran into this guy Basil Koch, who's the founder of the Swift, who created the Swift wiring system. And again, we just randomly ran into each other, and I asked him, like, do you think it's an antique? And he basically said yes. He didn't like crypto, actually, but that's because it's competitive with the Swift wiring
Mm.
system. But it did need an overhaul, and now it's been weaponized by various countries. And I don't know, crypto's got a long way to go still, but that's a good thing as an investor in crypto. It's got a long way to go, just like the internet had a long way to go in 2000. In 2000, the internet had a long way to go. It didn't reach a billion users until 2005. Crypto's got a long way to go also. What's interesting, though, in terms of like these technological, like the internet, everyone thought it was a fad. Crypto, everyone thought it was a fad. Now it's clear it's not. Um, but AI is something different. I've never seen a technological innovation where the hype is almost in sync with the reality. Like, as
Yeah.
soon as the hype went out of control for AI, so did the reality. Like, AI is incredibly useful right now.
Right.
And kind of like consumer AI with ChatGPT. I mean, AI has been around forever with computer vision and
Right.
speech recognition and so on, but like large language models have not been around forever. And that's
Right.
like a new thing and more consumer oriented. And that hype really does equal the reality. Like, it's incredibly useful. And it's gonna change the world economy. It's what's actually probably protecting the world from a really bad recession right at this moment. I mean, we probably are in a little recession right now. That, I mean, we'll know in the future when the economists eventually tell us. But
Yeah.
AI is definitely buffering the fall.
It's fascinating. I mean, we use it in so many ways already, and yeah, a whole other conversation. But I love
I
it.
mean, I've been teaching my kids how to cheat on their college essays with AI, and it's amazing.
Well, it certainly does bring into question, like, what are the skills we need for the future? They're definitely not the same ones we need for the past, while understanding also that, every tool is a weapon, and every sword cuts both ways. Like, you can use AI to make you dumber. Like, it's no, it's easy. Like, to not think about anything, to just, mindlessly have things written for you and everything else. But my true hope for all technology is it allows us to be more human. And I think that in the future, you know, uh, definitively human skills are going to be the most valuable skills, because we'll have something that handles everything else.
Well, look, there's a lot of evidence that our brains are smaller than the brains of our ancestors from 100,000 years ago,
Yeah.
because they had to remember wherever they were, they had to remember in a 5 mile radius, every place where there was potentially dangerous animals and what those animals look like.
Yeah.
They had to know for every vegetable or plant or whatever what was poisonous, what wasn't, where is it, how do I hunt, how do I, they had to know and memorize so much more. I mean, we don't even have to. I don't even have to remember where you live anymore, and I could still. And you're 1,000 miles away from me. I could still show up at your house for dinner today,
Right.
because I'm a cyborg. I could fly in the air
Yeah.
and find your place without knowing the single thing about the geography of Orlando, and and then I could get us a gourmet meal on top of it, like without knowing anything about cooking. Like we're all kind of cyborgs anyway at this moment.
That's amazing. By the way, when it comes to crypto, I just need Shiba Inu to go to a dollar, a coin, and I'll be
That
good.
that I
I'll be.
can't promise you. But
What do you think? So, for people who are trying to understand cryptocurrency, what do you think they need to know? In a few bullet points, and what's important about it, and why is it possibly the future of? I think it probably is. Why is it the future of money?
I think the fact that there's I mean there's a lot of things, by the way. It's not just the future of money, it's also the future of computing, and it's the future of marketing. And these are topics really belong in a full podcast or whatever. But in terms of money, it's important to understand there's no possibility of human error. And by human error, that means a lot of things. Like during the pandemic, if you had $100 in your pocket, you would say, "Oh, it's great. I have $100 in my pocket." But meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, was printing trillions of dollars. Like during COVID, 40% of all the money ever created in the history of mankind was created in the 2 years of COVID. And so, what does that do to the $100 in your pocket? Well, it makes it worth less. If there's more of it, if there's greater supply, then and demand always remains the same. If there's greater supply, then the value goes down. So the $100 in your pocket could, the theory was, and the Federal Reserve did not believe this at the time. The theory was your $100 would be worth less. Well, now it turns out that's true. There was a severe inflation last year where price of eggs went from like $1 to $3, and price of everything went up. And so your $100, instead of buying 100 eggs, could only buy you 30 eggs. And so that's one type of human error. Another type of human error, oh, I put money in the bank. The guy put the wrong number in, or added a zero or took away a zero. I've been on both sides of that human error, and it happens. Or when I wire, let's say you're in Japan, I wire you money. I gotta send, like I said earlier, I gotta send it from my bank to my local reserve bank to this Federal Reserve to the Swift wiring system, and then all the way back down in Japan central bank, local bank, blah, blah, blah. There's human error every step of the way, potential for it. There's also fees every step of the way. There's $3 trillion in fees every year just from like sending money back and forth.
Wow.
So, and by the way, there's no privacy. If your government wants to know everything Nick Nanton spends on, they could find that out pretty easily. And by the way, they could take your money if they want to, and
Right.
that doesn't happen often, but it happens like if you're late on your taxes or whatever.
Right.
And in some governments, like Argentina, it was notorious. It would just go in and take half the money in everybody's account, and we'll say, "We'll owe you later the half." And so that's scary to live on a centrally. That was the basic idea. So in 2009, when Bitcoin was created, the creator Satoshi Nakamoto basically was worried about all this money printing and the potential that bankers could ruin the value of the dollar in his pocket. So that was the initial thing, and then the privacy was another issue, and the decentralized aspect is again not only good for money, but you could do decentralized computing, which imagine turning a crypto token could basically be as powerful as a supercomputer if you add computing, if you add computational power to its skill set, a crypto skill set, then suddenly you have a mini supercomputer all over the place, and that gets a little more esoteric. But now in Hollywood, actually, people use a token called Render to render 3D videos because it's faster than a supercomputer. And so again, there's a lot of uses for crypto that we haven't even touched upon yet. But as a payment system with no human error and no potential for centralized control over the value of your money, and also privacy, crypto so- solves the problems of money. Don't forget, there's been a lot of forms of money. There was, metal backed money, like gold backed
Right.
money. Then there was um, paper money backed by gold. So it was essentially the goldsmith would issue you an IOU, and you could use that as money, and that evolved into paper money. Then there was money backed by a government, and so there's no gold backing the U.S. dollar anymore.
Right.
But George Washington's there on the $1 bill. Plus, there's a pyramid with an eye. Plus, in God, something on this dollar bill is backing the value of this money, and people will say, well, what's crypto? It's just ones and zeros. Yeah, there's probably millions of man hours of code in Bitcoin. There's real value there, and it has functional value. So there actually is something real backing crypto. It's not just ones and zeros. It had more of backing crypto than the dollar bill. And everyone says, "Oh no, we should go back to a gold-backed currency." We're getting all into economics here. You cannot go back to a gold-backed currency if you're $34 trillion in debt. There's not enough gold in the world. So people don't understand these basic economic things that you know Bitcoin at first, but other cryptos now try to solve. Again, I think money is the least use case of future use case of Bitcoin, but time will tell.
Got it. And do you mean money is the least future case of Bitcoin proper, or crypto proper, or blockchain,
Crypto,
or okay?
crypto.
Okay,
There's
got it.
so many other use cases that are
Yeah.
going to be more valuable. I mean, of course, money is a valuable use case, but there will be other use cases as well. So, and we'll see as time goes on. Like again, I can go on forever. It's not my favorite topic, crypto. It just happens to be a topic I know an enormous amount a lot
Well,
about.
and it's, I mean, you probably don't love talking about money either, but it's a very important tool,
Yeah,
and and when you're good at it, you're good at it. So, all right, a couple more things.
That,
During the
that's a good
pandemic,
point, by the way. Why did I always go broke, and why did I always then make money? There's three skills to money: making it, keeping it, growing it. And for whatever reason, I had a skill or have a skill at making it. I'm a good maker of money, but I really had to learn from starting from scratch. I didn't have any talent at keeping it or growing it. And so I had to learn even harder those skill sets. And it's very difficult. It's always difficult. But making it, I have a good like business sense.
yeah,
Even though, by the way, I don't enjoy business. I enjoy this. I I enjoy stand up comedy. I enjoy writing. you
yeah.
know, I enjoy playing games. I don't enjoy the business that much.
I get it. By the way, we're going to talk about your article about New York City, but do you still own part of the comedy club up there, or did you get rid of that?
No, I got rid of that because, after that article, the club was getting vandalized.
Oh,
It was on the Upper West Side of New York. It's a classic comedy club, stand up New York. Like people
yep.
like Jerry Seinfeld performed there, Chris Rock, last time I was there, Tracy Morgan was performing. I performed right after him actually. And uh it was a great club. And then after I wrote this article, this was during COVID, it was locked down, but like one day, someone in pink chalk. So it was like some mom strolling her baby decided to stop and like write all over the window, owner doesn't like New York City. Don't go to this club. And so, I like my co-owners. We were all friends. And I sold my half back to my co-owner.
Got it. Tell us about the article you wrote, why you wrote it, and now looking back, the importance of that, or just tell us
Yeah.
about that article.
So I love New York City. I was born there. I grew up in there, around there. I lived there my entire adult life until recently. And during the lockdown, which, there's lots of reasons there was a lockdown, but I was very, very concerned about the economic fallout of the lockdown, particularly in New York City. I mean, Broadway was shut down, the Midtown, which all the New York City needs 100 billion a year in taxes raised to survive, to hire the police, teachers, sanitation workers, healthcare workers, all the infrastructure needs, and so on. So I was really worried that the entire base of New York City was leaving because people were, the finance industry was working remotely. Um, all the tourists were gone and maybe going to come back, maybe not. Commercial real estate was certainly going to collapse, and I would mention this to people, like smart people, and they're like, nah, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, you have to think about this. Like, this is an issue. And so I wrote this article I titled it New York City is Dead Forever. Here's why. And I really was scared that New York City would be dead forever because nobody was paying attention to these very real problems. And the article went viral. I mean, I've had a lot of articles go viral. This article went viral beyond my imagination. And it went viral in New York City because everyone that lived in New York City hated it. They didn't read it. They just thought, oh, this guy hates New York and is trashing New York. And then it went viral outside of New York City because everyone else in the country hates New York City. They're like, oh yeah, New York City's dead. And so like Rush Limbaugh read it word for word on his show. Glenn Beck read it word for word on his show. Joe Rogan read it on his show. Like, but Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh read it out loud, word for word. Maybe 30 million people read this article. And I was getting all this hate in New York City from friends. I lost friends. I literally lost family members. Family members would write articles trashing me. Jerry Seinfeld wrote his first and only op-ed ever, a full page of the New York Times, just trashing me. Like he doesn't know how to. He's the funniest guy ever. Doesn't know how to write an op-ed. He just trashed me. He didn't present any arguments. And Andrew Cuomo then emailed his article to 10 million people. And I don't know. And so many. I was getting death threats every day. There was probably 10,000 tweets a minute trashing me in the 2 weeks after the article came out. And I've had backlashes before. Like when in 2005, I wrote nobody should go to college. I wrote a column in the Financial Times. Everyone trashed me. I would write, "Oh, no one should own a home." Everyone would trash me. I've had backlashes before. Bitcoin, I had backlashes, and and I would deal with it. I had never had a backlash like this, where friends who I had given their careers to, like I'd created jobs for them and paid them when they were broke, family members, ex-girlfriends, of course, like everybody was trashing me, like close relatives. And I I started to get depressed. And I don't think I average like you as an 8 on the happiness scale. I think I average more like a 4. But now I was averaging like 1 or 2 because of, like, I didn't understand. And I made the mistake, which I never would have made before. I've been on social media since before social media, but I started arguing with everybody who was tweeting against me. It was so stupid. And I was taking it really personally, particularly when family members were upsetting me, and friends who I trusted, and other friends would call me up and say that they were being unfriended by friends because of uh, uh, because of their association with me.
With you, wow.
And so my wife and I, we moved to Key Biscayne around this time, or just temporarily, and we started going out there and hanging, making new friends. And it was almost too much for me that at the same time that I was going through this depression, I also had to pretend to be an extrovert and and hang out with people. Like Key Biscayne is like 70% Latino, and they literally have a party every night. And I just couldn't deal with it. So I literally was shut down. I stopped writing. I stopped going on social media. For the first time in 20 years, I stopped writing. I was used to write every single day. I would write a blog post a day, and I stopped writing completely. And I went in my office and I shut the door and I started playing chess every day, all day, like sometimes 24 hours a day. And it's because when I was a kid, I was I was New Jersey junior chess champion. I
Right.
was a strong chess master when I was a kid, and so I just, this was the thing I always returned to. It was like my first love in life, and I was, and at that time the TV show The Queen's Gambit was around, so people were
Hmm.
getting obsessed with chess. It was, there was 100 million users on chess.com, which is where I would play chess, and and then I decided, you know what? I can't do this. I can't just play chess all day. So I need a reason why I'm doing this. And so I told myself a story, and that I was going to go on a quest. And the quest was, can I be in my 50s as good as I was at chess when I was in my 20s or my teens? And So for the first time in 25 years, I started playing in tournaments again and started getting coaching again. And I mean, this is a whole other story, but I really realized that a lot of, you asked me earlier, what got me out of my suffering at different points. And a lot of it was this idea of a quest. So you think of a quest like, oh, King Arthur and his knights are going to search for the Holy Grail. And they never found the Holy Grail, right? But they go on, they have all these adventures along the way. And for me, I realized my whole life has been one of quests. Like, oh, I'm going to do a quest to create a TV show called 3 a.m. Never made a TV show called 3 a.m., but I went through the whole, I had so many adventures, thousands of hours of adventures, and did this website for HBO and shot this documentary, and still it affects my life. Stand-up comedy. I did stand-up comedy performing every day for 6 years. It was a quest. I never became the world's greatest comedian, but I've toured the country. I've traveled around the world doing comedy. Like it was a quest. I never found the holy grail to it, but so many adventures happened along the way. And so I decided I'm going to go on this new quest. Nobody, if you ask anyway, if you do all the statistics, it's almost impossible to do what I'm doing. That in my 50s, after a 25-year break, I'm going to try to be a strong chess master again. And I mean, you're a ranked master forever. You keep the rank forever, but realistically, I'm not at that level. And and it's been a fascinating quest that's led me to, I mean, I've had dinner with the world chess champion Magnus Carlsen in Norway. I've hung out with former champion Garry Kasparov many times. I've flown all over the world watching like these amazing players and becoming friends with them in tournaments. Because of my status in other areas, I write for the premier chess magazine in the world, New in Chess, and and then also I've talked to sports psychologists, nutritionists, neuroscientists, age specialists, uh, sports coaches, uh, uh, many chess trainers, and I have a really good chess coach, and it's been just a fascinating journey with so many adventures where I've learned about myself and growing older and competition and success in ways that I've never knew before. And it's just been a fascinating journey. But it all started with that getting super depressed over that article.
Got it. It's so much there to unpack. My friend
Yeah,
Dan
sorry I went
Sullivan.
on about it, but
No, no, it's
it
great.
really changed my life. It was really a hard thing, actually. I mean, when Jerry Seinfeld wrote his op-ed, which was 2 weeks after the article came out, I thought everything had finally died down, and I cried that morning because Jerry Seinfeld was like a hero to me,
Right,
and
right. I get it. To have him take aim at you like that without even knowing you, and unfair commentary from
I,
him for sure too.
he used to perform in my club. Like
Yeah,
we had never spoken, but I was
yeah,
there when he would perform, and I've
yeah,
watched him many times live.
yeah. The my friend Dan Sullivan. Dan is one of the top entrepreneur coaches in the world. He talks about anytime you set out to achieve a big goal, um, you usually the strategic byproducts, he calls them, the micro skills you gain, the relationships, the things you learn, are far more valuable than that initial thing you were chasing. So
It's so true. It is unbelievably true. Like, just take stand-up comedy as an example. All right, I'm not going to go up there and compete with, I don't know who your favorite comedian is, Louis C.K., Amy Schumer, whoever it is. But my abilities as a public speaker now are like, there's so many. I've 10x my my crowd work, my stage work, my voice inflecting, my ability to read the audience and understand what's happening in the audience, my tribe building, which is when you kind of connect one part of the audience to the other to make sure they're all having a good time, my ability to understand where I am in a hierarchy so I can negotiate going on stage with, the managers of every comedy club, and
sure.
just so many micro skills I had to learn.
Well, it's again on this podcast, I really try to distill down, and we've both gone through a bunch of questions. I think anyone could think through that would, if they were to take note of those at different parts of their life and their journey, they could improve their life. But I think my favorite one here now is really, what's my quest? I think that's a great question to ask yourself because
Yeah.
not only like as a storyteller, it's interesting. I've been really thinking through this recently, like our lives are just the story we tell ourselves. I mean, even from like, I know somebody who was convinced because of a story their grandmother or grandfather told them that they were Native American. They were part Native American. And so part of everything they did their entire worldview was formed by their actions they took was based on the pride of their Native American heritage. Well, when they did like a 23andMe, they had zero Native American heritage, but and it depressed them for a while. But I think they just got over it and learned how to still honor that. But like we're like when we do these genetic tests and when we look back at our life, when we look at the stories we tell ourselves, it's all just a story. It's all just the way we've connected the dots. And I think asking yourself like, what quest am I on, or what quest should I be on, is an amazing question, and allows you to frame your story in a way that hopefully can get you motivated for what's next, for some sort of a journey, some sort of a better life or better relationships or whatever it is. So I love the whole idea of we should always be on a quest. And if we haven't identified that quest, the quest we're on, or realizing we're not on the right quest, we need to move to a bigger, better, or more healthy quest. I think that's a really great question that ties it all together and allows us to find hope. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's where suicide comes from, right? I mean, you don't have hope. You don't have hope that tomorrow could possibly be any better than today, or I've lived my
Yeah.
best years. I can never have anything better, so I don't have hope.
Well, and that is a very critical thing because look, and I've had to confront that your brain does change as you age. So if you were a great mathematician and or great at learning languages quickly when you were 22 years old, it's not going to be as quick right now. The brain loses its kind of, you might say the brain loses its raw athleticism. It
Yeah,
just cannot do, you cannot do mental gymnastics anymore. You're great at taking, the brain is better at taking from experience and saying, I've seen this idea work and this idea not work. So I'm going to do, like, I could look at an entrepreneur and I have a better ability now to determine if they're going to succeed or fail than I
right.
had in my 20s or 30s. Much better skill at it now. And the result is I'm able to make more money by backing good entrepreneurs now. But so some parts of the brain improve, but the raw smarts decreases. You're never going to be as creative and smart as you were in your 20s, at least in some respects. You're not going to write, you know, as beautiful. The Rolling Stones never wrote a good song again after their 20s. So, I mean, you can argue with me on that, but the evidence is in the music sales. And so, um, uh, by the way, it doesn't mean you can't be a good music songwriter in your 50s. It's just a
Right.
different experience.
Yeah.
Like, I'm never going to have the creativity, and my memory, for instance, is not as good as it, like, chess is memory, calculation, and creativity. And calculation is visualization. Like, you have to see moves ahead. So memory, you have to memorize openings like, oh, in this situation, everybody plays this. Here's why. You have to know, you have to memorize these things, and you have to memorize tens of thousands of things. Then there's visualization. You have to see many moves ahead very quickly. And then there's creativity. You have to like think of things that surprise your opponent so you win. And all three of those things, all three of them, just the brain declines and they don't work as well. So, which is why mathematicians peak at 25. But again, if I were to say to myself, oh, this game I'm playing is like this other game I once saw, and he did this, that improves. Now, unfortunately, that is not as important as the other three skills. But, but it's why, I mentioned the peak age for mathematicians is around 25. Guess what the peak age of historians is? Peak age,
40.
69.
Wow.
So, so so it's important to remain healthy if you're a historian, so that because your best works are going to come in your 60s and 70s. And this is very true. Like, you think of like great historians like Paul Johnson or even like Walter Isaacson right now. They're getting better
Yeah.
as they age. And again, though that skill though that improves doesn't really work that well in chess. It's not as important. And so it's very, very difficult. So I've also had to deal with failure on a level I've never had to deal with before in a game that I typically was successful at. I mean, I've had tournaments where I would just lose like unbelievably in ways that I never had before. But at the same time, in sometimes I am better than I've ever been before. I've beaten better players than I've ever beaten before. I've had better tournaments than I've ever had before. So my variance is much greater as I age. So that's part of the adventure as well, is then accepting yourself and accepting these changes and trying to maximize the benefits. But what is a quest? It's a very interesting thing. Like I all the time people hear people say, "Oh, I just want to serve others," or "Oh, I want to, solve world hunger and then give back what I made." I think a quest should be somewhat selfish. Like I want to be a great chess player at the age of 55. I want to be a great stand-up comedian. I want to be a great writer. And then you could then form around it like, okay, well, I'm going to document this process and write about it and give hope to other people who want to pursue their loves at the age of 55 and let them know that it's possible and that here's what happened to me. So, okay, now I can give it a more public, altruistic meaning. But a quest itself, I want to visit every diner in the United States. That could be selfish. And then you kind of, because we're wiser and older, supposedly as we're older, then you could fill in the gaps and make it a wise decision for yourself.
Well, you
And
have to gain skill before you can be valuable to someone else. So at the end of the day, I love the fact that like let's frame, in our context, let's frame a quest as something that's skill building and experience building for you, and then you can translate that into all sorts of other things. I have a friend who
right,
just visited every country in the world that's recognized by the United Nations, and he's about my age. I think he's what year old? He's like 44. And there's like 155 countries or some crazy amount. It's like mind blowing. But like I'm sure he will have value to relationships and businesses that very few people on earth could ever have because he went on this quest.
just think about that micro skill also. I bet you that guy can kick ass at logistics.
Yeah.
Like he had to basically figure out how to get to every country and live there and manage his financial life at the same time and coordinate his relationships, which is I'm sure was difficult for the people in his life. And it's there's a lot of skills you would not expect in achieving that quest, even if he didn't succeed, or I assume he did, but
Yep.
and like you said, the stories he could tell, the value he could bring. It's not just about the countries he visited; it's about having a big target and moving towards hitting that target. That's hard, and and
And
you
that's the
risk
quest.
failure.
And everybody needs one of those, and we get these skill sets and strategic byproducts, as we call it, off of them. I love it. Well, James, everyone needs to check out your podcast, your blog, our Choose Yourself docuseries, all the things. Thank you so much for coming on Question Able, man. I really appreciate it and value your friendship, and it's so great to see you.